We don't have that kind of money just sitting around, Emily. You need to face reality. My father's voice cut through the small apartment like a blade-cold final. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, judgment radiating off him. Behind him, my mother hovered. Silently, her lips pressed together so tightly they'd lost their color. In the next room, my 7-year-old son, Ethan, slept fitfully, his frail chest rising and falling with the help of the oxygen machine's mechanical hum. On the kitchen table, hospital bills were scattered like shattered pieces of my life, each number screaming what I already knew. I was failing him. $85,000. That was the price of hope. The cost of the experimental treatment that could give Ethan another chance at life. His rare heart condition no longer responded to standard treatments, and the clock was ticking. My name is Emily. I'm 31. A middle school science teacher in Columbus, Ohio, and a single mother fighting a war that never seems to end. Ethan's father left when he was 3, the day the doctors said chronic, said he couldn't handle the pressure. That was 4 years ago. He never looked back. My parents lived 20 minutes away in the same picture-perfect suburban home where my younger sister Claire still lived like a princess in her untouched childhood room. Realistic? I repeated, my throat tight. Dad, my son is dying. The doctor said 6 months, maybe less, if we don't start treatment now. My mother reached for his arm in that familiar way, the gesture she used when she wanted to sound compassionate but never truly disagreed. Honey, we understand this is hard, but we've already helped so much. 3 surgeries, remember? We can't drain our savings completely. I'm not asking for everything, I pleaded. Just a loan. I'll pay back every cent. I'll pick up another job. My father cut me off with a sigh. Emily, you're already drowning. How would you ever pay us back? Be reasonable. There are programs, financing options. Look into those. I had looked. I'd spent sleepless nights researching every last one. The payment plans took too long. Ethan didn't have that time. The lenders wanted blood with interest rates that would trap me for life. You don't understand, I whispered. You're my last hope. My mother's eyes softened for half a second, and for that fragile heartbeat of time I thought she might actually convince him. But then my father spoke again, his tone final like a door closing. We can't do it. Emily, I'm sorry, but we have to think about our own future. We're not getting any younger. And just like that, the conversation and whatever hope I had left ended. They left a few minutes later. I stood at the window watching their car fade into the distance until the taillights disappeared. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing against my chest like the air itself had turned heavy. I walked into Ethan's room and sat beside his bed. The soft hiss of the oxygen machine was the only sound. His tiny chest rose and fell uneven but steady. He looked peaceful, innocent, blissfully unaware that his own grandparents had just turned their backs on him. The next morning, I started making calls. Every relative, every distant family contact, I could remember, anyone who might have a shred of compassion. Most offered kind words and prayers, some sent small amounts that barely scratched the surface. My Aunt Teresa mailed me $500 and a handwritten note that said, I wish it could be more. I cried reading it, not because of the money, but because it was the first gesture that came from love. Still, $85,000 might as well have been a mountain, and I was digging at it with a teaspoon. 2 weeks later, after another brutal day teaching, I walked into my apartment and froze. Ethan was gasping for air, his lips tinted blue. My heart stopped. I called 911, my hands shaking. So badly I could barely hold the phone. The paramedics worked fast. The sirens wailed through the night. And at the hospital, Dr. Morrison met me with that same grim clinical compassion. His condition is worsening faster than we expected, he said quietly. Without the treatment, we're looking at maybe 3 months. Possibly less. 3 months. That's all the time my son had left unless I found $85,000. That night, I sat beside his hospital bed and started a crowdfunding campaign. I poured my entire heart into it, Ethan's story, his smile, the way he still laughed at bad knock-knock jokes despite the pain. I uploaded pictures from before he got sick, when his cheeks were rosy and his eyes still sparkled. People responded. Friends shared it. Teachers donated. Even some of my students' parents chipped in. For 2 weeks, I watched every dollar roll in with a mixture of gratitude and fear. When the total hit $12,000, I cried because it was something but not nearly enough. Then came the phone call that broke whatever was left of my calm. My sister Claire, her voice bright and breathless with excitement. Emily, you won't believe it, Jeffrey proposed. We're getting married. I forced a smile she couldn't see. That's wonderful, Claire. Congratulations. I know, right? And Mom and Dad are being so amazing. They're paying for the entire wedding. Can you believe it? They said there's no budget limit. Jeffrey and I are thinking Italy, maybe the south of France. Oh, Emily, it's going to be perfect. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. No budget limits? I repeated softly. None, she said, laughing. Dad told me his little girl deserves the best. Nothing's too good for me. Her words echoed in my head. Nothing's too good for me while my son lay in a hospital bed fighting to breathe. We're meeting with wedding planners next week, Claire chirped. The wedding isn't for another year, but we want to start planning now so we can get exactly what we want. I stood there in my cramped apartment surrounded by stacks of unpaid medical bills, while the sound of Ethan's oxygen machine hummed through the thin walls. My sister's voice, full of laughter and excitement, echoed through the phone, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. Something small and sharp and cold settled deep in my chest. It wasn't envy. It was clarity, a realization that would take root and bloom into something unrecognizable in the months to come. Those months blurred together: hospital corridors, sleepless nights, and the dull ache of watching my son fade a little more each day. I maxed out every credit card, begged banks for personal loans with suffocating interest, and sold every item that once held meaning. My grandmother's ring, the only thing my mother had ever given me without judgment, was pawned for $800. My car? Sold and replaced with a 15-year-old sedan that coughed like it was dying every time I turned the key. I even moved from my one-bedroom apartment into a studio because every dollar counted. Through it all, Claire's wedding unfolded like a royal spectacle. Every family dinner, every phone call, it all came back to her day. My parents lived for it, drowning in flower catalogs and champagne tastings. They took virtual tours of Tuscan villas while I sat in hospital waiting rooms counting the hours between Ethan's treatments. I tried to be happy for her. I truly did. She was my little sister, once my best friend. But somewhere along the way, our parents built a pedestal for her so high I could no longer see the top. Claire, the golden child, perfect grades, perfect job, perfect fiancé. And me, the disappointment. The single mother with the sick kid and a bank account that never stayed above zero. Then one humid July evening, my mother called. Emily, honey, we need to talk about the wedding. I rubbed my forehead, exhaustion weighing me down. What about it? Well, she began in her soft practice tone. Claire wants you to be a bridesmaid, of course. But the dresses are about $300 and we need you to order yours soon. $300. I did the math automatically, nearly 2 weeks of Ethan's medication. I don't know if I can afford that right now, I said quietly. A pause. Then her sigh. Emily, this is your sister's wedding. I know. But things are really tight. Ethan's medical bills. My mother cut me off, her tone turning sharp. You're always talking about Ethan's medical expenses. I understand he's sick, but life doesn't stop for the rest of us. This is Claire's special day. The words hit harder than she realized. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone until my knuckles ached. Can I think about it? Of course, she said curtly. But the deadline to order is next week. When the call ended, I stared at the silent phone in my hand, and that cold, hard feeling inside me, the one that had started as a seed, began to grow roots. Claire really wants you in the wedding party? My mother insisted before hanging up. After the call ended, I sat alone in the dim glow of my studio apartment and cried quietly, hopelessly. How had it come to this? How had my family become so blind, so hollow? My son was dying in the next room, and all they could talk about were dresses and seating charts. Ethan's condition grew worse with every passing day. The doctors told me the experimental treatment was no longer an option, we'd missed the window. Now the goal wasn't to save him, only to keep him comfortable. Palliative care. 2 words that shattered me in ways I didn't know possible. I watched my little boy fade piece by piece. His laughter, once bright enough to fill every corner of our tiny home, grew quieter. He stopped asking when he could go back to school. He stopped talking about becoming a scientist. He knew children always know that time was slipping away from him. I took an unpaid leave from teaching just to be by his side. My principal was kind, but kindness didn't pay rent. Every dollar mattered, every meal was rationed. I applied for every grant, every charity, every miracle I could find. Most of them had waiting lists or requirements I didn't meet. Then came September, 5 months after my parents had turned their backs on us. My mother called. My mother called again, her voice sparkling with excitement. Oh, the bachelorette party was divine! We rented a villa in Napa Valley for the weekend 12 of Claire's best friends. Wine tasting, spa days, a private chef. It was absolutely magical. Claire was glowing. You should have seen her face. How much did it cost? I asked before I could stop myself. Oh, I'm not sure. Your father handled that. Maybe around $10,000. But it was worth every penny to see Claire so happy. $10,000. More than a tenth of what could have saved my son's life spent on a single weekend of luxury. Something deep inside me cracked then. The last fragile thread of loyalty that had tied me to them snapped. That sounds wonderful, I said flatly. You know, Emily, my mother continued, I wish you'd try to be more supportive. Claire feels like you're not excited for her. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't even sound human. Claire feels I'm not supporting her? She does. She says you've been distant, and you still haven't ordered your bridesmaid dress. I can't afford the dress, Mom. I told you that. She sighed, the sound of false disappointment. Maybe if you managed your money better, you wouldn't always be in this position. The words hit me like a slap. Managed my money better? As if I'd been wasting it on luxuries instead of fighting to keep my son alive. As if the mountain of medical debt crushing me was somehow my fault, not the fault of a broken system and a family who chose wine and roses over their dying grandson. I have to go, I said quietly. Ethan needs me. Of course he does, my mother replied. Her voice dipped in sugar, but the judgment underneath was sharp enough to cut. You know, Emily, maybe if you didn't let Ethan's problems consume your whole life, you might actually find some happiness. Claire manages to balance everything so beautifully. I hung up without saying goodbye. October came like a shadow, the chill of it settling deep in my bones. Ethan was slipping faster now, in and out of the hospital, his tiny body fighting a war it could no longer win. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about weeks, not months. I spent every waking moment by his side, reading him his favorite stories, whispering to him about what heaven might look like, holding his fragile hand through waves of pain I couldn't take away. My parents visited once in a while, never for long. They'd stop by for 20 minutes, pat Ethan's hand awkwardly, then leave, their faces twisted in polite discomfort. I could see the relief in their eyes the moment they stepped back into the world where Claire's wedding still mattered more than their dying grandson. Claire came once. She stood at the doorway of Ethan's hospital room, flawless as ever, designer bag, perfect makeup, hair, styled like she was walking into a magazine shoot. She lasted barely 5 minutes before announcing she had a dress fitting. He's so thin, she whispered in the hallway as if this was some shocking revelation. Yes, I said simply. It must be so hard for you, she continued, placing her manicured hand on my arm. But you've always been so strong, Emily. Strong. That word had become a curse. People said it when they wanted to excuse themselves from helping. Strong meant, you'll survive without us. Strong meant, we can go on living our pretty lives while you drown quietly alone. The wedding's in 3 weeks. Claire added, her tone bright and airy. I really hope you'll still be a bridesmaid. It would mean the world to me, and maybe it'll be good for you, you know? A little joy. A break from all this. A break. As if grief had an off switch. As if I could step out of Ethan's hospital room, put on a $300 dress, and pretend my world wasn't collapsing. I'll think about it. I lied. It was easier than explaining what her words did to me. The wedding invitations had arrived 2 months earlier. Thick cream-colored cards with gold-embossed lettering. Even the envelopes smelled expensive. I couldn't help myself anymore. I automatically converted everything into what it could have bought for Ethan. The invitations alone could have covered a month of physical therapy, the venue deposit, an entire year of medication. Later, I learned the final cost of Claire's dream wedding, $3,000, $230,000. The number echoed in my skull like a scream I couldn't silence. They'd spent nearly 3 times what could have saved Ethan's life on one single glittering day of celebration. The venue alone had cost $80,000, almost exactly what I'd begged for. The flowers? $15,000. The food? $40,000. The dress? $12,000. I didn't learn all this at once. It came to me in fragments, overheard conversations, careless mentions from my mother, each number landing like a blade. She had no idea what those figures did to me. Or maybe she did and simply didn't care anymore. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ethan had one of his worst days. His heart began to fail, the monitors blaring their mechanical panic, nurses rushing in, orders flying through the air. I stood frozen beside his bed, clutching his small hand, watching strangers fight to keep him alive. They managed to stabilize him, but Dr. Morrison pulled me aside afterward, his face heavy with pity. "Emily, he doesn't have much time left. Days, maybe a week. You should start calling family, anyone who'd want to say goodbye." I called my parents. My father answered, his voice distracted. "Emily, we're right in the middle of the rehearsal dinner planning. Can this wait?" "Ethan is dying," I said flatly. "The doctor says days, maybe less." There was a pause. Then a detached, awkward, "Oh. Oh, Emily, I'm so sorry. Do you need us to come?" Do I need you to come? My son, their grandson, was slipping away, and he wanted to know if I needed them. "Yes," I said, hollow. "I think Ethan would want to see you." "Of course," he said. "We'll try to stop by tomorrow. We have the final venue walkthrough in the afternoon, but maybe in the morning." They arrived the next day at 10 a.m., Starbucks cups in hand. They stayed 15 minutes. Ethan was barely conscious, his breath shallow, his little chest rising in painful effort. My mother cried softly, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that probably cost more than Ethan's breakfast. My father stood near the door, checking his watch. Twice. "We have to go," he said finally. "The florist is expecting us at 11. "The florist," I repeated, numb. "For the centerpieces," he added. "We can't afford mistakes this close to the wedding." Mistakes. He said it in a hospital room beside a child whose only mistake was being born into the wrong family. They left soon after, promising to come back. They never did. Claire didn't come either. Too busy with last-minute emergencies, a cellist and her string quartet had fallen ill, apparently a tragedy worthy of tears and frantic phone calls. Ethan died quietly on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before Claire's wedding. He slipped away in his sleep, his tiny hand still wrapped around mine. The nurse who pronounced him dead cried harder than my parents did when I called to tell them. My mother's first words after I said the words, "He's gone," were, "Oh no. Oh, Emily. No." What terrible timing. Those were my mother's first words. Not sorrow, not disbelief, just inconvenience. Because Ethan's funeral would interfere with the wedding schedule. That was the moment something inside me fractured. The grief was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it something else began to stir. Cold, steady, patient. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. The funeral was set for Friday, 2 days before Claire's Sunday wedding. I didn't ask them to postpone the wedding. I didn't ask Claire to change her plans. I already knew the answer. I didn't have the strength to hear them explain again why a party mattered more than their grandson's burial. What I didn't expect was that they'd ask me to change the funeral. My mother called on Wednesday evening. "Emily, honey, we need to talk about the funeral arrangements." I was sitting in Ethan's room, the air still carrying his scent, his dinosaur poster on the wall, the rock collection from our park trips, the unopened science kit I'd bought for last Christmas. "What about them?" I asked. "Well, Friday is really difficult for us. We have the wedding rehearsal that afternoon and the dinner in the evening. It's all scheduled, deposits paid. Could you maybe move the funeral to Thursday? Or next week?" I just stared at the wall. My mind couldn't process what I was hearing. "You want me to move my son's funeral because it conflicts with a rehearsal dinner?" "It's not just the rehearsal, Emily," she said, as if that made sense. "It's the whole schedule, the guests, Jeffrey's family flying in from Atlanta, your father's giving a toast. We can't miss it. We'll absolutely be there for Ethan, but Thursday would work so much better for everyone. The funeral home can adjust, I'm sure." Everyone. The word hit like a slap. My voice came out flat, scraped clean of emotion. "So it's more convenient for everyone if we bury my 8-year-old son a day early so you don't miss cocktail hour." "Don't be dramatic, Emily," she said, exasperated. "You're making this sound worse than it is. We're trying to support you and Claire both. Why can't you be flexible? You know how important this wedding is to your sister." I hung up, because if I didn't, I would have said something I could never take back. The funeral stayed scheduled for Friday. I arranged it myself, paid for it with money borrowed from my principal, a man who'd shown me more compassion in 1 year than my own parents had in a lifetime. It was small, 20 people at most. My Aunt Teresa came. A few of my fellow teachers, some parents from Ethan's old class. My parents arrived 45 minutes late. They were dressed for celebration, not mourning my mother's nails, perfect my father's tie and wedding white. They sat through the service, dry-eyed and polite, and when it ended, they walked out before the small reception I'd planned at my apartment. They didn't look back. "We really have to go," my mother said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her lips barely touched my skin. "Claire's having a crisis about the seating arrangements." But it was a lovely service, Emily. Very tasteful. Tasteful. My son's funeral was tasteful? I didn't speak. I just watched them leave, watched their car disappear down the street off to their urgent appointments and social emergencies. And something inside me solidified. The grief didn't vanish. It froze sealed behind a wall of cold, perfect clarity. Saturday. I spent the day alone in my apartment, surrounded by sympathy cards and unpaid bills. The crowdfunding campaign $12,000 had long since been drained on treatments that postponed the inevitable. Now I owed $73,000 in medical debt, another $25,000 in credit cards. 2 months behind on rent. Ethan's death hadn't ended the nightmare. It had just made it pointless. My phone buzzed over and over, messages from people who meant well but didn't matter. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" What I needed was impossible. I needed my son back. I needed my parents to be different people. I needed this entire past year to be a bad dream. Sunday morning, Claire's wedding day. I woke before sunrise. I hadn't planned to think about it, didn't want to picture it, but my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "Wish you were here to share this special day. Claire looks absolutely stunning." I stared at that message for a long time. Wish you were here, as if I'd simply chosen not to attend, as if I were missing a brunch, not grieving a child buried 2 days ago. I got dressed and went for a walk. Columbus was beautiful that morning. Gold leaves drifting across the streets, the air crisp with autumn. Ethan had loved this season. We were supposed to go to the pumpkin patch. One more thing that would never happen. The phone buzzed again and again. My mother had added me to some kind of family group chat, photos flooding in one after another. The venue bathed in golden Tuscan light, Claire in a designer gown that probably cost more than my entire apartment. Towering flower arches, a 5-tier cake, a champagne tower glittering under string lights, a string quartet playing to guests who smiled and toasted under a vineyard sky. $230,000 of celebration while my son lay beneath. Cheap cemetery soil, his grave unmarked because I couldn't afford a headstone. I scrolled through the photos one by one, numb, detached, as if watching strangers. Everyone looked radiant. My father proud and gleaming in his tuxedo. My mother flawless, her face lit with joy. And Claire, perfect Claire, smiling like she hadn't just stepped over her nephew's grave to reach her altar. "Would you like me to continue from here, Johnny?" the moment Emily finally decides. My mother, radiant in her $3,000 mother of the bride gown, smiled beside Claire and her new husband, both glowing with the effortless joy of people who had never known loss. Around them, relatives I'd once begged for help laughed and toasted with champagne that cost more per glass than they'd donated to Ethan's treatment fund. In one photo, my parents danced. My mother's head was thrown back in laughter, her pearls gleaming. The caption read, "Best day ever. So blessed." I set my phone down and walked into the bathroom. The mirror didn't lie. 15 pounds gone in a month. Eyes hollow, ringed in exhaustion. I looked like someone who had watched her child die while her family celebrated. That night alone in my studio apartment, I made myself a promise. This wasn't over. They thought they could erase Ethan, erase me with glittering parties and curated smiles. They thought money could bury guilt deeper than a grave. They were wrong. I didn't know what shape my plan would take, but I would make them understand. I would make them feel even a fraction of what they'd made me feel. Not revenge, not yet. Something purer. Justice. Reckoning. Balance. I pulled out a notebook. Page. After page, I wrote everything down, every conversation, every lie, every refusal. The dates. The costs. The moments they turned their backs. Who came to the funeral? Who didn't? Every dollar my mother bragged about spending on the wedding. It became a ledger of sins, proof of what they'd stolen from Ethan. And from me. My phone buzzed again. A message from my mother. Home from Italy. Exhausted but so happy. Claire and Jeffrey's first dance was magical. I'll send you the video. I stared at the screen, then typed back, glad you had a good time. The 3 dots blinked, vanished, returned, then finally, we'll come by next week to check on you. I'm sure you're feeling better by now. Feeling better. As if grief followed a calendar. As if 7 days was enough to heal from burying your child. I didn't reply. The weeks after the wedding drifted by in a dull, colorless blur. I went back to work, moving like a shadow through classrooms that once felt alive. My students were gentle, kinder than usual, perhaps sensing the emptiness behind my smile. The school had offered more bereavement leave, but I refused. I didn't need rest. I needed routine. I needed motion. Anything to fill the hours that used to belong to Ethan's medicine, Ethan's laughter, Ethan's hope. My parents called sometimes. Short, polite check-ins that sounded more like obligations than love. Each call chipped away at the last fragile piece of my heart until there was nothing left to break. How are you holding up? They'd ask then. Rush to fill the silence before I could answer stories about Claire's honeymoon in Bali, about remodeling the kitchen, about which resort they might visit next spring. They never said Ethan's name. It was as if he had never existed, as if his memory might stain their good mood. Claire sent a single text. I'm sorry about everything. I hope we can move past this. Move past this. Move past watching my son die. Move past begging for help that never came. Move past the fact that she'd spent $230,000 on a single day while my child's heart stopped for lack of treatment. I didn't respond. 2 months later, December, they invited me to Christmas dinner. I almost declined. But curiosity won. I needed to see them, to understand how they could eat and laugh and sleep after what they'd done. Their house looked like a magazine cover, a 12-foot tree trimmed to perfection, garlands twined along the staircase, flickering candles in crystal holders. The air smelled of money, roasted prime rib buttered lobster wine that whispered $200 a bottle. Claire and Jeffrey were already there, sunburned and glowing from their honeymoon. Emily! My mother hugged me tightly, her perfume suffocating. I'm so glad you came. We've missed you. I stood rigid in her arms. Thank you for inviting me. Dinner was elaborate, every bite a reminder of how much excess they could afford. Laughter floated across the table, talk of wedding memories, travel plans, renovations. I sat quietly, moving food around my plate, the only sound from me the scrape of silverware against porcelain. Emily, you're so quiet, Claire said, her voice sweet and empty. Are you okay? I'm fine. You know. She continued, glancing at Jeffrey. We were thinking maybe you should move. Somewhere fresh, a new start. Columbus must have so many hard memories for you. Where would I go? I don't know, somewhere cheaper maybe. Jeffrey's company has an office in Kansas City. Cost of living's better there. We could help you find something. Help me disappear, she meant. Remove the reminder of the child they'd chosen not to save. I'll think about it, I said. Another lie. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been discussing your situation. Emily, you should consider bankruptcy. It's the responsible thing to do given your debt. Bankruptcy. For my son's life. As if Ethan's existence had been a financial miscalculation. You'll never pay off those bills on a teacher's salary, he continued. Better to wipe the slate clean. Start over. Start over. My mother nodded helpfully. We could help you find a good bankruptcy attorney. Your father knows several. I stared at them, my family sipping expensive wine beneath the glow of gold-trimmed lights. They talked about erasing debt the way people talked about erasing dust, not realizing that some stains don't fade, some linger, and some grow teeth. I set my fork down slowly, deliberately. You know what would have helped? I said softly. $85,000, 15 months ago. The table fell silent. Claire glanced at Jeffrey, uneasy. My mother's smile faltered, freezing mid-expression. Emily, my father warned, his tone edged with authority. We've been over this. Have we? I asked, meeting his eyes. Because I don't recall any discussion. You said no, and that was it. We made a difficult decision based on our financial situation, he said stiffly. Your financial situation? I gestured around the glittering dining room, the crystal glasses, the catered feast, the 12-foot tree glowing behind them. This doesn't exactly scream financial hardship. Neither did the $23,000 wedding. Claire's face reddened. That's not fair, isn't it? I stood the chair, scraping loudly against the polished floor. You spent almost 3 times what could have saved Ethan's life on one day. On flowers, cake, a dress you'll wear once. That's enough, my father snapped, standing too, his jaw tight with anger. We made the choice we thought was right. We're not going to apologize for supporting your sister's happiness. Ethan's... What about supporting his life? I interrupted, my voice breaking. He was sick, my mother said quickly, her voice trembling, but cold beneath the surface. The doctor said there was no guarantee the treatment would even work. We weren't going to throw away money on something that might not have helped. But you'd throw away twice that much on party favors and centerpieces that went in the trash the next day. Get out, my father barked. If you're going to be disrespectful, you can leave. I grabbed my coat, my hands shaking. Don't worry, I said quietly. I'm going. You're just bitter, Claire called after me. Because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted. It's not our fault you made bad choices. I stopped at the doorway and turned back. They stood there, all 4 of them, united in their comfort, secure in their righteousness. Bad choices, I repeated slowly. Like trusting family. Like believing blood actually meant something. Like thinking you'd choose your grandson over a party. Then I walked out into the cold December night. I sat in my rusted car, watching through the window as they returned. To their perfect dinner, probably already convincing themselves I was dramatic, unstable, ungrateful. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 4 years. Life continued because it always does. I declared bankruptcy just as my father suggested, erasing the debt but destroying my credit. I moved into a smaller, cheaper apartment in a worse neighborhood. Picked up tutoring jobs after school and through the summers. I existed, but I didn't live, and quietly, methodically, I planned. I couldn't touch them yet. Not yet. I couldn't fight them back then. I was drowning in grief, barely surviving, living day to day with a heart that felt permanently shattered. But being powerless doesn't mean being blind, and I wasn't done, so I waited. And I watched, quietly, silently, like a ghost they thought they'd buried. They didn't know I could still see their social media, that I was still collecting every lie, every post, every smiling photo where my son didn't exist. Every memory they erased, I recorded. Every time they pretended Ethan had never been alive, I saved the proof. Notebook by notebook, screenshot by screenshot. Claire got pregnant a year after her wedding. My mother posted daily baby shower photos, nursery tours, glowing captions about joy finally returning. Then little Sophia was born, healthy, beautiful, loved. Grandparents beaming in every picture, calling her their first grandchild. A relative commented, "Your first grandchild, how wonderful." And my mother replied, "We're over the moon." No hesitation. No correction. No acknowledgement that Ethan had ever existed. My baby erased as if he had been a temporary inconvenience instead of a human life. I screenshot the comment, added it to the file. Another piece of evidence in the museum of their cruelty. 2 years after losing Ethan, I started rebuilding. Night classes, working all day, studying all night. Master's degree, assistant principal, then principal. The raises weren't glamorous, but every dollar was a weapon being sharpened. I saved ruthlessly. A war chest disguised as a savings account. Power needs resources, and I was preparing for my moment. Meanwhile, my parents pretended time was forgiveness. Birthday cards with empty words. Christmas gift cards to stores I'd never step into. Then one day my father called, casually informing me they'd started a college fund for Sophia, and asked if I wanted to contribute to the child they replaced my son with, to the family that threw away his existence like trash. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I simply hung up. Claire mailed a birth announcement for baby number 2 Jackson. Perfect family portrait, perfect clothes, perfect smiles, and on the back, Hope you're doing well. A sentence written like a check mark, not a thought. I kept everything, every announcement, every message, every proof of how easily they lived without him. 4 years after Ethan's death, I had built a life out of ruins. Principal of a thriving school. Respected. Steady. Quietly powerful. And still, I watched them. Claire's husband climbing the corporate ladder. A bigger house, richer friends, a perfect, suburban life. All of it built on a foundation where my son didn't matter. Where my pain never existed. Where they pretended grief was optional. And they had no idea that every smile they posted, every celebration they flaunted, was fuel. Because I wasn't done. Not yet. My parents spent those years polishing the fantasy life they'd chosen over compassion. Country club days, golf tournaments, champagne brunches on vacations they flaunted across oceans and social media. They lived like grief never touched them, like my son never existed. For them, the world only ever moved forward wealth, status, comfort. For me, every day was a climb out of the grave they left me in. Then one ordinary morning, everything cracked. An email from a name I barely remembered. Aunt Teresa. Subject line, important family matter. I almost deleted it, but curiosity or fate made me open it. Your father lost his job 3 months ago. He invested everything in the company stock. The company collapsed. They're facing foreclosure. They have nothing. He won't ask for help, but they need it. I read it again. And again. Then I searched. And there it was. Headline after headline. Corporate fraud. Bankruptcy. Executives ruined. Retirement funds gone. My father's name right there under senior leadership impact. The empire they built, the one they chose instead of standing by me, gone in a flash. People call it karma. Some call it justice. I call it inevitable. You can't build a life out of denial and expect it to stand forever. Their world collapsed like they once allowed mine to. And suddenly, I wasn't powerless anymore. The phone rang a week later. My mother's number. I watched. It buzzed across the screen, a ghost resurrected by desperation. I let it rot in voicemail. She tried again the next day. And the next. Silence was my reply. Until one evening in May, a knock. I checked the peephole. My father. Not the polished man from family Christmas cards, but a faded version, shoulders slumped, years etched into his face, pride stripped away. I opened the door but kept the chain on. Emily, he breathed. My name cracked in his throat like it hurt to say, we need to talk. About what? My voice was ice. Please. Can I come in? No. He flinched like the word was a slap. I know things haven't been right. We made mistakes. Mistakes. A child dies and abandonment becomes mistakes. But we're family. We need your help. Help? I repeated, tasting the bitterness on my tongue. I lost my job. The house is being taken. Your mother's health. He swallowed hard. We've asked your sister, and now we're asking you. There it was. Not apology, not remorse. Need. They only came when they had nothing left to take from each other. So they came to take from me. Claire and Jeffrey were helping, but only enough to protect their perfect little world, their picture-perfect family, their safe bubble. And now suddenly I was supposed to be the safety net for the same people who stepped over my grief like it was dust on their shoes. We thought, maybe you could contribute something, my father said. Even a small amount, alone. Just until we get back on our feet. I stared at him through the narrow crack in the door. His voice had the nerve to sound hopeful. When my situation improves, I repeated slowly. He swallowed. I saw online, you're a principal now. That must pay well. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Desperate. I whispered the word like tasting poison. I remember being desperate once, his cheeks flushed with shame or anger. With my father, they always looked the same. Emily, please, he said. This isn't the time to drag up the past. I tilted my head and smiled a cold, sharp thing. Oh, I think it is exactly the time. You're facing collapse. Ruin. I leaned against the doorframe. That story sounds familiar. This is different, he insisted. We're your parents. And Ethan? He hesitated like the name burned his tongue. Ethan was your son, and our grandson. Silence, a canyon carved by years of abandonment. How much? I finally asked. Hope exploded across his face, ugly, desperate hope. 90,000, he stammered. If we can pay that, we can keep the house. But even 20 or 30,000 would buy us time. $9,000, more than the amount that could have saved Ethan's life. A chill slid through me, clean, decisive, final. I'll think about it, I murmured and shut the door in his face. Inside, I leaned against the wall and smiled. For the first time in 4 years, my heart beat steady. This wasn't pain or grief or rage. This was control. This was the moment I had rebuilt myself for. Judgment had finally arrived. I didn't contact them for 2 weeks. Let them sweat. Let them choke on uncertainty. Let them feel even a shred of what I had drowned in. 17 calls from my mother. 9 from my father. 3 long, dramatic texts from Claire about forgiveness and family support and how they always tried their best. The hypocrisy didn't surprise me. Cruel people always expect mercy in return. I said nothing. Silence was my weapon. Time was my ally. While they panicked, I researched. Their house, the one I grew up in, worth $320,000. They owed 90. Enough equity to crawl away, but only into a small, dull life. Cheap apartment, cheap groceries, cheap future. They wouldn't die. They would just finally learn how it feels to live with less than comfort. Ethan never got that chance. On day 15, I finally called him back. He answered like a drowning man reaching for air. Emily? He gasped, his voice cracked under the weight of his fear. I'm so glad you called. Please tell me you've thought about... I let him hang in silence, suspended between hope and despair for just 1 perfect second. The reckoning was finally here. Thank God, my father breathed like I'd thrown him a lifeline. I was terrified you wouldn't call back. I've thought about your request, I said, and the hope in his voice, raw, pathetic, almost childlike, was revolting. I want to meet, I continued. All of us, you, Mom, and Claire, we're going to talk. Yes, of course, he stammered. When? Where? We can come to you or somewhere neutral, whatever you want. My apartment, Saturday, 2 p.m. We'll be there. Thank you, Emily. You don't know what this means. I hung up without answering. Saturday arrived cold and gray, like even the sky understood the mood. I prepared like it was a boardroom execution. Chairs placed deliberately. A folder on the coffee table. Printed receipts, screenshots, timelines, a paper spine of truth. At 2 p.m., sharp they arrived. My father looked shrunken, his suit hanging off him like it belonged to a man who still had dignity. My mother looked as if bitterness had aged her twice as fast. Claire. Overdressed, clutching her designer purse like a life vest in a sea she wasn't prepared to drown in. Emily, my mother whispered, stepping forward to hug me. I stepped back. Sit. They obeyed. 3 figures lined up on my thrift store couch like scolded children. I stayed standing. Power isn't shared with people who once stepped on your heart. You asked for $9,000, I said. We know it's a lot, my father rushed. But we'll give collateral. We'll sign a loan agreement, interest, anything. How? My voice was ice. You have no income. Mom hasn't worked in decades. How will you repay me? I'm looking for work, he said. Something will come through. At 63, I let the skepticism slice clean. And with your name connected to a fraud scandal, he flinched. That wasn't my fault. I had no idea what the CEO was doing. Ignorance, I said slowly, is not innocence. His mouth fell shut. I lifted the folder. But we aren't here to talk about your failed career. We're here to talk about your request. My mother leaned forward, voice small. Emily, please, will you help us? That depends, I replied. First, we're going to revisit history. I pulled out a paper, not just paper, but a wound. Do you remember this? I held up a printout. My crowdfunding page from 4 years earlier. The number glared off the paper like a scar burned into time. $85,000 the cost of Ethan's treatment. May 16th, I said quietly. The day I begged you to help save your grandson. My mother's face drained like someone had pulled the life from her veins. Emily, we've talked about this, she whispered. No, I said. We avoided it. We excused it. We gaslit it. I held the page higher. You told me you couldn't afford it, that my child's life wasn't worth jeopardizing your retirement, that I needed to be realistic. Their silence strangled the room. For $85,000, my son might be alive right now. Their eyes fell. And now you want 90. I let the number hang like a noose. We made the best decision we could at the time, my father said stiffly. Did you? I asked, voice calm but razor sharp. I lifted another page from the folder. This is the receipt from Claire's wedding planner. Total billed, $23,000 paid in full. 18 months after you told me you couldn't afford $85,000 to save your grandson. Claire jumped to her feet, cheeks burning. This isn't fair. You're twisting. Sit, I said. My tone cut the air like ice. She sat. I laid paper after paper onto the table, each one like a hammer blow. Wedding venue, 8,000 flowers, 15,000 catering, 4,000 dress, 12,000 photographer, 8,000 entertainment, 1,000. I paused. Let the numbers sit there, let them choke them. Should I keep going? My father's jaw tightened. What do you want from us? An apology? Fine. We're sorry. We made a mistake. Is that what you want to hear? A mistake, I repeated slowly. You think choosing a party over your grandson's life was a mistake? We didn't know he was going to die, my mother whispered. You did, I said. The doctors told you. I told you. You knew and you chose not to care. I pulled the last page. The one that still tore something inside me every time I looked at it. A photo of Ethan in his hospital bed 2 weeks before he died. I placed it in front of them. This is what $85,000 would have saved. This child, your grandson. Remember him? My mother broke. Tears flooded down her face. Claire stared away, ashamed. My father? His eyes stayed on the picture, unreadable, a fortress finally cracking. Emily, please. My mother sobbed. We know we failed you. We know. But we can't change the past. We can only ask for mercy. Please. Mercy. I let the word hang cold and heavy. I don't remember receiving mercy when I begged you for help, when I sold everything I owned, when I lived in a single-room apartment, when I ate ramen so my son could get medication that kept him alive. We didn't realize. You realized? Enough to care more about flower arrangements and champagne fountains than your own grandchild. I cut in. They flinched. Good. I leaned forward, steady, composed, stronger than they'd ever seen me. Here's the truth I learned in 4 years. You didn't help Ethan because you didn't want to. It wasn't lack of money, it was lack of love. Silence. Thick. Unescapable. You chose what mattered to you, and it wasn't him. Or me. That's not true, Claire snapped. They were trying to protect their retirement. Oh, really? I cut her off. Because they spent nearly 3 times their retirement concerns on your wedding. Math doesn't lie, Claire, and neither do priorities. My father leaned forward, voice trembling with frustration and desperation. Emily, I understand you're angry. You have every right. But are you really going to punish us now? Are you really going to be as cruel as you think we were? Cruel, I repeated slowly, tasting the word like something bitter. Is it cruel to make choices based on what matters to you? Is it cruel to decide that your resources should go to your priorities instead of someone else's crisis? Because that's exactly what you taught me. That's the lesson you carved into my bones while Ethan was dying. So, you won't help us? My mother whispered. I didn't say that. I lifted the folder again and pulled out a check. $9,000. Signed. Dated today. Their eyes lit up, hope exploding across their faces like drowning people seeing land. I'm willing to give you this money, I said quietly. But there are conditions. Anything, my father blurted. We'll sign whatever you want. Interest, collateral, whatever it takes. It's not about repayment. I placed the check on the table just out of their reach. The first condition is simple. You say out loud that you chose Claire's wedding over Ethan's life. That you had the money and you refused to help. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Claire looked at them, voice shaking. You don't have to do this. She's trying to humiliate you. Yes, I said calmly. I am, just like you humiliated me when I begged for help. When I stood on your porch, sobbing, clutching medical bills, and you told me to be realistic. When I buried my child alone because you had rehearsal dinner. My mother's sobs filled the room. My father's face burned, red, shame, anger, truth, all twisting together. Finally broken, he spoke. We chose the wedding, he whispered. We had the money, and we used it on Claire's wedding instead of Ethan's treatment. And, I said softly, and he died because we didn't help. He finished, voice cracking. I turned to my mother. We should have saved him, she cried. We were wrong. We failed you. We failed him. Then I shifted my gaze to Claire. And you? I didn't know, she stammered. I didn't know they refused. Didn't you? I asked sharply. You never wondered where that money came from. You never questioned why I begged to move your bachelorette trip, because Ethan was in the hospital and you refused. You never questioned getting married 3 days after your nephew's funeral. She swallowed hard. No excuses left, no place to hide. I leaned back, calm and cold. Good. Now for the second condition. I looked at them, 3 people who once claimed to love me, and I spoke calmly, almost gently. You can take this money, save your house, and disappear from my life forever. No calls, no messages, no birthdays, no holidays, no pretending. Their faces froze. You cut me out of your hearts the day you chose luxury and appearances over Ethan's life. Now I'm simply returning the favor. My mother trembled. Emily, you don't mean that. We're family. No, I said quietly. We share DNA. Family is something else entirely. Family shows up. Family sacrifices. Family does not let a child die while they are choosing flower arrangements. I stood and walked to the door opening. The conversation was over. Those are my terms. You have 60 seconds. They looked at each other, desperation flickering between them. 43 seconds later, my father reached for the check with shaking hands. We accept. Good. I pointed to the agreement on the table. Sign it. It states you will have no further contact with me. They didn't even read it. That's how badly they needed saving. Pen strokes scraped the paper, shaky, broken, resentful. My father hunched over like a defeated soldier. My mother's tears splashed the signature line. Claire signed with anger, every line dripping entitlement and humiliation. I gathered the papers. Handed them the check. You can go. Emily, my father choked. No contact means no contact. Leave. They filed out, my mother sobbing. My father collapsed in shame. Claire's anger burning her from the inside out. I closed the door softly, locked it, and exhaled. Not triumph, just release. Then I went to my laptop, opened my banking app. $9,000 gone. Years of sacrifice reduced to $12,000, and yet I felt lighter, but I wasn't finished. I opened a drafted email one. I'd prepared months ago and attached a full timeline, messages, receipts. Then I wrote, Aunt Teresa. Thank you for being the only person who ever truly saw me. Attached is the record of what happened, every request I made for help, and every response I received. I think the family deserves to know the truth about Ethan, and about the choices that were made. Emily, I clicked send. The moment the email left my outbox, something inside me settled. Not revenge, not victory, resolution. They had chosen their priorities years ago, and today, so had I. I ended the email with one final line. Please share this with anyone you believe deserves to know the truth. Love, Emily. I clicked send. Attached was everything, every refusal, every bill, every screenshot, every hospital record, every picture of Ethan fading in that sterile hospital bed. Even the Facebook comments where my mother pretended Sophia was her first grandchild. The timeline showing they toasted champagne at a rehearsal dinner while I stood alone after burying my son. It was all there, organized, dated, undeniable. And Aunt Teresa? She was the family messenger, the type who forwarded recipes, gossip, prayer chains, and vacation photos to her entire contact list. By tomorrow morning, the truth would be in inboxes, group chats, and church circles across the state. The check would clear. They'd keep their house. But they would lose status, image, admiration, all the likey. Things they valued more than my child's life. Their punishment wasn't poverty. It was exposure. An hour later, a knock rattled my door. I checked the peephole. Claire. I opened the door. No. Welcome, no warmth. You signed an agreement not to contact me. Her jaw was tight, her eyes blazing. That email, you can't do that. You're destroying everything. Their lives, their reputation, you're ruining them. I'm telling the truth, I said. Ruining comes from actions. I'm just showing the world what they chose. You're vindictive, cruel. I studied her face, the anger and entitlement swirling behind it. No, I replied softly. I am handing them the same currency they handed me. Consequences. You could have forgiven them. They gave you $90,000. They gave me back a tiny piece of what they denied Ethan, and only because they had no other option. Don't rewrite heroism where there was survival. You'll never move on, she spit. You'll hate us forever. Hate? I almost laughed. Hate requires attachment. I don't hate you. I don't feel anything. You stopped being my family the day my child died while you taste-tested wedding cake. She faltered, voice breaking. Mom is shattered. Dad looks destroyed. Was it worth it? Ask Ethan if justice was worth it, I said. Oh, right, you can't. He didn't get the luxury of growing up. Claire's face cracked. You're as cold as they said. Cold? I whispered. My heart died in a pediatric ICU. You were too busy choosing centerpiece colors to notice. Silence. She had no defense, only tears she refused to let fall. Then she turned and walked, away, heels clicking down a hallway that suddenly felt too quiet. I closed the door and sealed it forever, between me and the people who once pretended to love me, not family, not anymore, just strangers who share my blood, and lost the right to share my life. In the months that followed, I didn't hear from them directly, but word traveled, slowly, quietly, painfully. My parents became ghosts in their own world. People stopped inviting them places. The friendly morning phone calls disappeared. Their country club forgot to renew their membership. Church, the place they once used to brag about being pillars of the community, became so uncomfortable that they eventually stopped showing up entirely. They still lived in that big, beautiful house, but it turned into a silent cage, a reminder of everything they'd chosen, and everything they'd lost. My father, once full of pride and power, ended up working as a consultant, making a fraction of what he used to. My mother, the woman who used to care about appearances more than people, developed anxiety so bad she needed therapy. For the first time, she had to face consequences without a social status shield. As for Claire and Jeffrey, they ran, packed up their perfect life, and moved out of state. Distance is easier than accountability, I suppose. Their annual holiday cards, once flashy reminders of their perfect family, never came again. I even heard a rumor that my mother told people I died. I guess that's easier than telling the truth that her daughter cut her out forever. In some ways, she wasn't wrong. The version of me who begged for scraps of love, who accepted being second place, who bit her tongue to keep the peace, that girl is dead. I built a new life. I learned how to trust again. I met people who showed up when life got heavy. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. I traveled to places Ethan dreamed about, and I left parts of him in beautiful corners of the world. I lived not just for myself, but for him too. And that 9,000? I don't regret it for one single second. It wasn't charity. It wasn't forgiveness. It was closure. It proved something, not to them, but to myself. I was the bigger person. I offered mercy to the same people who couldn't offer humanity to a dying child. And when I was done, I walked away. Some people say real forgiveness means letting go without consequences. But those people never watched their child suffer alone while family celebrated elsewhere. They never had to choose between medication and electricity. They never buried their baby while knowing millions were blown on flowers and champagne. No, my version of forgiveness came wrapped in a check they couldn't refuse. And a goodbye they never saw coming. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about fairness, about balance, about returning the lessons they taught me that love is conditional, loyalty has limits, and some lives matter more than others. So I closed that chapter. I honored my role as their daughter one final time, and then I became someone stronger. Someone they will never get to know. I walked forward carrying Ethan's memory and nothing else. And for the first time, I felt peace.